Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon. We're going to have an interesting conversation today. We have Burlington Town Clerk Amy Warfield, and we have from Gatehouse Media, Joy Richard. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk about the public records law. In the end of 2016, which is the last legislative session, we enacted a new law intended to make advances to make public records more available. Massachusetts had been ranked the worst state in the country for access to public records. And while the current law doesn't really bring us into the top 10 by any means, it's certainly a step forward. And a lot of our improvements come incrementally because we handle it as a balance between what municipalities and agencies have been doing, what they now can do, and what we can provide as far as transparency to the public. So the issue here is that if someone wants to get a public record, a record from the point of view of a municipality, what the town government is doing or the state government is doing, they should have a way of doing that in a way that's not very costly, so that they're not prevented because it's too expensive, even if they have the right to it, and a way that doesn't take too much time. So this new law says that essentially the municipality has, I believe it's 10 days to respond to a request from the public, which includes the media, to a records request, and then 14 days to provide the records unless more is necessary. For a municipality, there's no charge for the time it takes to copy, if it's 4 hours or less.
2 hours.
2 hours or less, I'm sorry, for an agency. Mm-hmm. And the copy charges are now limited to 5 cents a page, right? Some municipalities were charging 50 cents a page. And again, that would be just way too expensive if there were numerous copies. So I want to have a talk about that. Amy, with respect to Burlington, talk about how someone goes about getting a public record from the town and what your response would be.
Yeah, well, on our website, basically you can download the request form, or you can come into any of the offices, fill out the request form. As you've said, we have 10 days to respond to the request, and usually that outlines just getting back to the person, making sure that they've clarified what they're looking for. And as long as we can email them the documentation, there's usually no charge. It does, after the 2 hours of if there's stuff we have to pull and search, we do charge them. We can charge them at the rate of $25 an hour. But the other part of that, like you said, is just knowing where those records are and having control of your records really makes it quite inexpensive. And so for most of the requests, we currently are up to about 100 requests for this year. We run about 300 or 400 requests of the standard requests in a year.
So, and the $25 you mentioned, that's part of the new law.
That's part of the new law, that's correct.
Right,
yeah.
There were some agencies that were charging exorbitant rates.
Right,
and it just became ridiculous that while they had to provide it, they were making sure they didn't provide it by charging so much money.
Well, and I think a lot of it had to do with, and this is what a lot of towns are dealing with and struggling with in terms of converting from having entirely paper records to having electronic records. And before, I would say, within the past 5 years, more and more communities are making that transition. But when you had paper records that maybe weren't they weren't cataloged, they weren't put in any kinds of order, it could take hours and hours and hours to find things. But as people have gotten more proficient in the fact that we have more records, cataloging them. One of the other things that Burlington has done, and this goes back even 20 years, is that early on we got into having an archivist. We're one of the few communities that has a full-time archivist, not a historic archivist, but a corporate type archivist who has all of our information cataloged, and we can pretty much get our hands on any kind of record that somebody needs.
Yeah, on the state level, I know that, first of all, this law, again, encourages municipalities and agencies to go digital so that these records can be provided digitally, and then there's no cost to that. And then on our state level, the administration has been converting records to digital format since this governor got there, which is a great idea, and he's been working with us as we suggest more records that our constituents are looking for to make sure they can just be available and downloaded.
Yeah.
Joy, from the point of view of the media, and I know that I was on the committee when we heard this bill, and outlets like the Globe and Gatehouse and others came in and testified, and it was a mess before we got a handle on how we could create a new law. What's your response to having seen it in action?
I think it's very helpful. Personally, on the level that I am in terms of community journalism, we don't tend to request a lot. It's more like at the Globe level or at a larger daily level. But I have in the past requested records. I've been grateful that all of my towns have been very open with them, including the police departments, who can be more closed off than, say, a municipal office would be. And I've also haven't run into the huge fees, which I know have been a huge problem for journalists all over the country. Thousands of dollars worth of paperwork that a lot of times will come out of their own pocket if they want to get something done in a timely fashion. So I think this is great. I think it's going to help a lot of people, especially those who are doing investigative journalism every day, who need the records promptly. And sometimes these types of stories can really save people's lives, especially when you're working on stories that maybe are directly connected to the Department of Children and Families. There have been a lot of stories that have come out recently, and that requires a lot of paperwork and records requests. So I think it's a good thing.
We do, as a government, you're right, you put it the correct way. We do help people, and sometimes we save their lives. We're involved with the public safety issues and security issues. And so the access that the media has and the public has to our records is how they know they can trust what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly sometimes people make mistakes, we're all human, but we've got to be able to provide the records or the evidence to the
Yeah.
people looking. And the media is essentially our arm into doing that, our representative, because otherwise you'd have everybody, you'd have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And we rely on local journalism and the Globe, the Herald, journalists like that to get to that. Otherwise, how do you trust
Yeah.
the system?
Yeah, it can be particularly difficult with the police. That's the hurdles that I've run into. Even departments who take a long time in giving the police logs over, which is very basic public information that anyone off the street could get if they wanted to. Taking their time, being frustrated about it, saying, well, how are we going to do this? It's like, well, it's been going on for years. We've been running police logs for years. This wasn't out here. This was in a different part of the state. But it can be very, very frustrating, especially when you're doing a very simple story about, an arrest or something like that. So
Yeah, because I know in this area you run the police log every week in the paper, and I would think that runs fairly seamlessly.
It does. Detective Tiggis is very good about it. This was more back in Central Mass, and I think maybe things have changed out there now, especially since there are new laws. But they can be very close to the vest with a lot of information.
But that does bring up one of the issues that, as a keeper of the records, we do worry about is, and maybe some of the pushback sometimes is, well, what is this going to be used for? Now, obviously, police records are public information, up to a certain point, but it's, so what is this going to be used for? How is the person requesting it? And again, that's none of the things we can ask, but how is that person requesting it going to use it? The other thing is also a concern, so a kind of a public safety or public information. It like, for instance, one change in public information is, think back to when we were kids and they used to post the birth records in the paper. Now we don't do that because it's a public safety issue we're concerned about. So that's one of those places, those things that we deal with. The other thing is having people's information out there or being asked for things for commercial purposes.
Right.
We all kind of just balk at that, and me personally, I know with political campaigns, these people come in, they request for our voters lists, and they're selling them for thousands of dollars to campaigns. And so that's the other thing that we, yes, it's public information. Most certainly, being a registered voter is something that we have to disclose if somebody is a registered voter. We never know who they voted for or what, but what's happening to that information once it goes to that organization is what we worry about.
Right. You certainly know that they came in a primary, and you know what ballot they pulled in a primary, and that's information that a company might find useful.
Right,
Like you
and a
said.
candidate would find useful, at different points too. So, those are the things. And then what happens is, like, for instance, Massachusetts is the only state in the union that still does an annual census. We get people who often say, "Oh, I don't want to fill out the census because I know that's going to put me on a jury list. I know that you're going to sell it to somebody." So those are the dilemmas that we have as a municipality, to be able to have accurate information for planning uses, for school uses, for demographic information. And so those are the dilemmas that we kind of grapple with public information requests.
Right, and in the legislature, when we craft legislation, we also have that same balance. I get involved with my background and my interest in the legislature. I've done a lot of employment discrimination work, and so while we have public records, for example, records that are filed with the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, I want to be sure that those public records redact the name of a victim, which in that case would be the name of the complainant, unless you have the authority of the complainant, which I think makes sense. But currently, that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
If a record is a public record, all of it is a public record.
Yeah.
So we've got to look at, that's Chapter 66, is through other laws, how can we create some carve-outs that make sense, that's still fair to the media,
Yeah.
because the media may be interested in who is a person that's been accused multiple times of sexual harassment in the workplace in Massachusetts, but maybe I don't need to know because I might not want to publish the names of the victims.
Yeah, that's something that we struggle with ethically a lot. For example, I'd say it's about 5 years ago now, when I was at my former paper back in Central Mass. We had a case that came out where a little girl was, over a course of time, victimized by a teacher, and it had come out through a source. And of course, I went to the courthouse, pulled all the records, which includes police reports, which don't redact her name.
Right.
And as a journalist, or the public needs to be able to trust us that we're going to keep those names private. But again, when you're writing about these cases, they're very specific, so it's almost like the whole school already knows who it is. And how do you write it so that you're shining a spotlight on the victim the least amount, who is already technically known to the public, and you're really highlighting the crimes that this other person did. And so I had a long conversation with her mother. I'm not gonna basically out her like other publications had. I'm doing this to shine a light on the crime, not so much on her. People will know it's her, but I'm not going to be pointing my writing towards her. So, it's a hard balance, because a lot of times papers will say, well, it's public record.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But as a journalist, you have to kind of go by your own ethical gut. So it's an interesting balance.
It's important because there are journalists and there are journalists, and you have your own principles and, as you say, your own sense of ethics. And so even if in one arena this name is known, it doesn't mean that in the arena you're writing for, that name is known there. And so you've got your conscience to battle with, to say, there are other people who are now going to find that information, and do you want to be part of that?
Yeah.
When it's something as sensitive as that.
Right, just because it's there doesn't mean it needs to be published, like you were saying. And also, I had an experience not too long ago looking to find death records through the medical examiner's office. Never having done that before, I did call the medical examiner, and they said, well, you can have X, but you can't have the autopsy. Well, if I have X, then I can't figure out my story because I need the autopsy. But in Massachusetts, an autopsy is only available to the family. So that was a learning experience. And I can very much understand why it would only be available to the family, because there might not be an ethical journalist using it. I wasn't going to use it for publication, but more as like for background.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting discovery. I don't think many people know that.
Yeah.
Might make people feel better that an autopsy is not available. Yeah.
Well, that brings up the whole point about dealing with vital records, and that vital records are public record, which means people can go in and get things like death records and that type of stuff. So those are the things that we battle with. Somebody coming in. We did have a case, or I heard of a case in Massachusetts here, where somebody was getting death records and then filling out stuff for that family and that kind of stuff. But again, because death records are public information, nobody did anything incorrectly in terms of handling them, but the families were hurt in the process, to say. And it does take that, there's a thing about, the freedom of information is that, yes, you are allowed access, but then what we deal with on the records management side is, what do I do to kind of still protect the people whose records and information it is. One thing in Massachusetts they did finally do is that they removed Social Security numbers off of death certificates.
Right.
Oh, that's good to know. I didn't know that.
So you can no longer, and we used to get requests from other states that would say, we need to have a copy of the death certificate, but we do not accept death certificates with Social Security numbers on them. So we had another form that we would have to fill out for them. But yeah, so those are, it's the information is there, and in this day and age, how, anybody, so not everything, but people can ask for things, but how do we protect the people that are, whose information it is and might be damaged by something in that?
Yeah, which in a sense is why in the legislature, when we had our committee chaired by the late Peter Kokut, we looked at this and tried to do this sort of deep study into. It's not as simple as let's just do it, because you've got to look at these ramifications. From the clerk's point of view, the ramifications of what about some people who will ask for something every day, not because they want to do anything with it, but because they can.
Yeah.
And the clerks were saying, we're being buried and with this work, and we can't do our other job.
Yeah.
So we put some limits to it. That's why the $25 an hour, at the discretion of the clerks, is available. And as you say, the issue of, are we exposing too much? So we've got to look piece by piece at what are we doing.
Yeah.
With the overall concept being we're a government and transparency is important.
Yeah.
And so we've got to head toward that light rather than away from it, but in a way that is sensitive to what we're doing.
Yeah.
Amy?
Fine.
So have things changed? Now, since you've been out here, you've covered the two of the towns that I represent, Burlington and Bedford. Have folks been receptive to your records requests, or has it changed over time?
Yeah, it's been a little bit easier out here, actually. Sorry, Central Mass. I have a very soft spot in my heart for you, but it was.
We'll be sure not to send them the tape.
Yeah, a little bit more difficult, and that's could have very well changed in the last 5 years. But it's been a lot easier. I haven't had to request anything big and scary yet. So when that happens, maybe it'll be different. But like I said, going through the interactions I have in the past, I kind of know how things work. And so I know like where to go and where not to go and what I can and can't get. So it's been good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an important job that you do.
Yeah.
And we need to make it easier and not harder for you to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's, in terms of, I've worked with Joy on just getting information out, and I think that's the other side of it, is that a lot of times there's information that we feel is important to get out to our citizens. They may not even be aware that it's important, and so a lot of times reaching out to the media and just saying, hey, I've got this, I'd like to do this, I'd like to get this out, that's another place where people aren't even sure that they don't even know that information exists or care, and it's a process of getting it out to them in some kind of format, whether it is something like town meeting or even dealing with voting and early voting or just local town elections. And so there's two senses of information that need to be out there.
Right. Do you use social media at all to get word out about things?
I do. I have a Facebook page under Town Clerk, and I also do monitor kind of all of the public forums that are out there. I do a lot of emailing in terms of getting things out to known groups like town meetings, because in Burlington, because being a representative town meeting, it's a more finite list than an open town meeting in a town. But it's kind of the fastest way to get things out to people. One benefit, or one way that we used it, was a couple years ago in January when we had those series of snowstorms. It was just very easy to be able to get out and let people know there wasn't going to be town meeting because of the snow. I have then a small group of about half dozen people that don't use email regularly, and so those are people we would still call or something like that. So yeah, I try to use it. There are pitfalls with that as well, and we're kind of learning how to kind of work around those. What are maybe some of the legalities of using social media and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just another form of getting the information out.
I know that the media generally follows Twitter. I say generally because I'm not sure of your practice, but is that your practice as well?
Definitely. Twitter's kind of like the hub of all like media sharing information back and forth, especially when it comes to like police, fire, emergencies, stuff like that. An election, live tweeting during election is very important. Thank gosh you guys are so good at getting numbers out, and I mean that.
Well, thank you. We try hard.
You've been one of the easiest towns to work with in terms of that type of stuff. Makes our coverage a lot easier just because, you know, just like you guys were up early and out late. So to have it as quickly and succinctly as possible, even this time with all the write-ins that happened, it was easy. So
good. That's
thanks.
good to hear. I like hearing that
You're
because that
very-
is one of our, that's one of the kind of places where, again, the pushing the information out is something that people are looking for. So, and we need to do a better job. Just even, a website is great, and Facebook is great, and even Twitter to an extent. But we've got to work more on how do we push this information out so that people, if it hits them, they're like, oh yeah, I wanted to know about that. I didn't know I did, but now
And it may inspire them to vote, which
Yeah.
would be great, especially in the local
Yeah.
elections, like everybody's always saying.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Okay.
To segue in there and to bring up, and I just want to second what Joy just said, your website is so nimble and
well,
quick
thank
and
you.
easy to use. On election night, you've got your results up there, I think within minutes of
Yeah.
the compilation, which is useful to us, and we
Good.
do appreciate that
Good to hear.
efficiency. So sometimes people are now questioning the security of elections. You hear a lot of news items nationally about election security, and I think people might have a reason for concern locally. So let's talk about how secure our voting is in Massachusetts and especially in Burlington.
Sure. Well, Massachusetts, we're kind of unique. I've sat in on a number of seminars recently held nationally on kind of cyber elections and that kind of stuff. But one of the things about Massachusetts is that we are still, our voter registration system is a totally, it's not a web-based system. So it's all hardwired in. Each one of the machines in my office that connect to the state system are on a dedicated line that the state puts in and pays for and that kind of stuff. So the voter registration is very secure. The second part of it is actually the machines that we use and everything surrounded the election. None of that, outside of posting stuff onto the web, is in any way connected to electronically. Now, on the downside, people say, well, that means you're kind of very archaic and that type of thing. And in technology-wise, yes. I mean,
Right.
the voting machines that we use are probably about 20-year-old technology. They're optical scanners. But they are not in any way, shape, or form connected to the internet or Bluetooth or anything. So there's no way that anyone can hack into a particular voting machine. We do have security procedures with the electronic card, the memory cards that we use and that type of stuff. And then the other piece of it is just because we still use a paper ballot, the nice thing is we have total recount capability. In these situations in other states where they're either using electronic, even full electronic voting, or where they're online, getting online to a website, those are all places where you're opening yourself up for some type of hacking. And so, when we've had to do recounts in Burlington, we maybe get less than 1% change in the vote. So, and we have the ability to be able to go back and check that. I go back, and I'm sure you might be too young, but Ken, I remember, you probably remember the little flipper machines.
I do.
Those machines had no recount capability at all.
Yeah.
The only thing you could do is go to the back of the machine and say, yeah, okay, that's how many people have voted. and that there was no recount or any kind of capability. So when optical scanners came out, that was like amazing.
Yeah.
And that you can, do those types of things. So I feel very secure about the equipment we use. Now, there's constantly the push to update the technology, and I'm not technology phobia. I spent 25 years in electronic publishing, but I do know that there are some problems there. And I
Right.
think that those are what the Secretary of State's office even deals with, what's the next generation of machine and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think you're aware that some of the states that use online-based voting have come back to optical scanners.
Yeah, because again, there's more control. There's no, you don't have to even think about hacking.
Right. 26,
Because there's nothing-
Yeah. 26
nothing to
states
do-
that
yeah.
Russia says that they were able to hack into.
Yeah,
And then we're left to believe that they didn't really cause any trouble once they did that. Well, then why did you? It's a little hard to believe you were in there.
Yeah.
What happened?
well, and the whole problem that you deal with again, coming from technology background, the whole problem that you deal with is you're always chasing those people who think it's fun to try to break something, and so
Right.
you've got to kind of get ahead of that curve, but it's almost impossible, and so that's just the issue you have to deal with, and so for right now we're dealing with a very tight, secure system, and as long as we can do what we need to do with running an election, I'm kind of content with what we have.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I remember the flipper system, and right after college I moved to Florida where we had the hanging Chad system.
Yeah.
And this system is the one that works the best, and there's, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of
Yeah.
thing.
It seems
Sure.
like if there's so much security in it, then there's no reason to change. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not technology phobia if something works properly.
exactly.
So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, there'd have to be a reason to improve, really.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so what happens when someone in Burlington comes in, you mentioned registration, and you match them up to their registration, they say, that's me,
Yeah.
right? You
Check them off on the voting list, yeah.
Right, right. And first of all, they don't have to show you an ID to vote because they're on the list.
Correct.
And the only way that there would be a problem is if there's two Ken Gordons, for
Yeah.
example. And other than a junior and a senior, has that ever happened in your experience?
No, I mean, well, we have had people who have come in the past and given a name and not been on the list. And there's two ways we handle them. Either, and it happens from time to time that people have moved several times in town
Right.
and said, well, but this is where I was last registered. And it's like, are you sure? And we'll go check their other address, and they're on that list. The other thing is we do periodically, to maintain our accuracy of our list, is we do inactivate people. We've sent them a card saying, we're not sure you're still in Burlington, let us know, but they ignore it.
Right.
And then when they come in election day, they're not on any list. But we have them on an inactive list, and then you do have to show ID to show that you're a Burlington resident still.
And what do they have to show?
Driver's license, phone bill, anything, kind of U.S. mail that has been sent to them, and then they sign a affidavit saying that yes, this is who I am, and I'm still living in Burlington based on, and we put down whatever ID they used. Then they are allowed to vote that day with an authorization. If they aren't on that inactive list, then we do call back to the office, to the clerk's office, and we do research them. They're always given the option they could use a provisional ballot, and then within a certain number of days, if we can find that yes, they should be a Burlington voter, they can. A lot of times we get people who have moved out of Burlington, they haven't been in Burlington for over 2 years, and you go through all this and then you find, oh, well, they were really registered in Waltham.
Right.
Unfortunately, at that point, after the election, there's nothing we can help them with, but they were given a chance to vote with a provisional ballot. So.
Yeah, but they were really Waltham residents.
And they were,
and
and
would be
they
voting
just,
there.
oh, I didn't, we send them out a thing, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize that I was registered there.
Okay. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion about our election laws and about our access to public records. Thank you very much for coming on Rapping with the Rep. I appreciate it.
Sure.
And folks, we'll see you next time on Rapping with the Rep.